Hey everyone, welcome to this week's small group. We're so excited you're here. Let's start with a summary. And I did preach this week, so I'll be doing the summary. So essentially, we had two different passages. I was assigned Mark chapter 2, verses 13 through 17. And I added another one, another gospel passage. And so I did those two passages, and it was the same message. It was the idea that the gospel is for everyone. So let me read these two passages for you. The first one is Mark chapter 2, verse 13 through 17. He went out again beside the sea, he being Jesus, and all the crowd was coming to him and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as he reclined at a table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. For there were many who followed him. And the scribes of a Pharisee, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to the disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." So that's our first passage. It's the call of Levi, or the call of Matthew. And the last line in there I really love, and it goes, when Jesus heard that they were complaining, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." See, I love this idea. There's a theme here that we talked about quite a bit in the sermon, that if you are broken and you know it, then you know and you understand you need a healer. You will seek one out. See, if my arm is broken, then I have a very obvious need, and I'm like, oh, I need a healer. But if I don't think I'm broken, I won't seek out a healer. So we're going to listen to that concept as we go into this next passage as well. And this is Luke 18:9 through 14. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. Two men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, "God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this here tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get." But this tax collector, standing far off, he would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell you, this man went down to the house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbled himself will be exalted. So do you hear this concept that we were talking about a little bit earlier? If you don't know that you're broken, you won't seek out a healer. And if you do know that you're broken, you'll seek out a healer. Right? And so in this parable that Jesus tells, the Pharisees don't think they're broken. They see themselves as righteous because they're comparing themselves to others. They see themselves as righteous so they don't need a healer. Whereas the tax collector, he understands he's broken. And so he says, "Lord, have mercy on me. I'm a sinner." He had a correct understanding of who he was and that he was broken. Now he's still loved, he's still cherished, God still pursues him, but he's very broken. And I think we often will compare ourselves to the wrong standard of righteousness. One thing that we often do is we'll compare ourselves to others around us, to the world, as you see the Pharisee doing. You see him going, well, I'm not like an adulterer or a liar or a thief or even a tax collector. And so then you look pretty good in your own eyes. However, we have got to have a right understanding that our standard of righteousness is not the world, but it's Jesus. And when we look at Jesus and we compare ourselves to Jesus, then we go, yeah, I've got a lot of room for improvement. I'm very broken. And so that's the difference there. If you compare yourself to Jesus, you're going to understand you need a healer. But if you compare yourself to the world, you might be able to talk yourself into saying, I'm pretty good. There's a couple quotes here. One is Warren Wiersbe says, "Jesus only saves sinners." That's a great line. And we'd like to talk about that later in the questions. Another one is the Pharisee used other people as his standard of righteousness. Another one is, since God himself is the standard of righteousness, the tax collector knew that he fell short and his only hope was God's grace. So the big idea is that the gospel's for everyone. So even the tax collector who was hated, he was a traitor, he was a liar, he was a thief, he was accepted. Jesus offered him an invitation, and he took it. And so the gospel's for everyone, but we need to have a good understanding of that we are broken. Once again, we're loved, we're pursued, we're made in God's image, we are valuable, but we are broken. And so we do need a healer. So that's the main idea, is that the gospel is for everyone.
All right, and some questions for you. What does it look like when we compare to others versus comparing to Jesus?
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit, the standard of righteousness, Jesus being the standard. So just to give an example, I have a dear friend who was in prison for quite a few years, and he would talk about, he said, well, if you were a misdemeanor, then you would say, well, at least, I'm in jail, sure, but at least I'm not in for like a bigger crime, I'm just here for a misdemeanor. And then people that were there for bigger crimes, maybe grand larceny or grand theft auto, something of the sort, rather large, they would go, well, at least I'm not here for a violent crime. I'm not as bad as those guys. And then the violent crime people would be like, well, yeah, I was violent, but at least I didn't murder somebody. And so then they would be like, we'd go to the murders, and they're like, well, at least I didn't, and they'd fill in the blank, at least I didn't have anything to do with kids, at least I murdered an adult, right? And so we continue. It does not matter, really, how, quote, bad we are. If we compare ourselves to the world, it's pretty easy to find someone else who is worse than you, right? And we know that that's just not true, whereas if our standard is Jesus, once again, we look at him, and even if we're really good in our own eyes, we look at Jesus and we go, yeah, nope, I do not compare to him. And so we humble ourselves is what that does. It really helps give us a correct understanding of where we stand and that we do need a healer.
Okay. What does the quote by Warren Wiersbe, Jesus only saves sinners, mean?
Yeah, so I like this quote. You could take it, and I think it's correct, that Jesus only saves sinners because there's only sinners to save. That is very true. There's no one on earth that's not a sinner, and so that's all he can save, But I also think that he's only saves sinners means that he'll only save, people only need saving if they understand they need saving. I think I said that right. It comes back to that concept. If you don't know you're broken, then you won't seek out a healer. But if you know you're broken, if you know you're a sinner, if you know you need saved, then you can be saved, because then you can be healed. If you're broken and you don't go to a healer, you won't be healed. If you're a sinner and you don't know you're a sinner, then you won't go to the healer to be healed. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how can we practically humble ourselves in this context?
Yeah, within the context of being healed and everything. So, practically speaking, I think it would be a very good habit or routine to compare yourself to Jesus. If you're ever feeling your chest is getting a little puffy, you think you're a little better than you are, I think comparing yourself to Jesus, not for the sake of making yourself feel bad, I don't want to suggest that, but simply saying, okay, I want to look at my life and I want to look at how Jesus lived his life. I want to look at how he reacted to things and how I react to things. And you will be humbled rather quickly if you're honest with yourself. And so I think that's a practical way that we can sit down, and it does not take long. You can sit down and go, okay, do I look exactly like Jesus because he's the perfect standard of righteousness, or do I look like the world? And I think pretty quickly we all will say, yeah, maybe I'm growing, but I've still got room to grow, and I am broken. Once again, loved, cherished, pursued by God, all of these things, but broken, truly broken. So that's how I'd answer that.
All right. And then we have a few discussion questions for you. One is, who are the people that the American church tends to think are too far gone for the gospel to help? Second, how can we learn and embrace humility in our lives? Next is, how do you think it went with Levi or Matthew, same person, just different names, and the other apostles. You know, it's one thing for Jesus to invite him to be an apostle. It's another thing for them to really embrace a tax collector. What do you think that looked like? How do we keep our need for the gospel fresh in our thinking? And so those are your discussion questions. And then if you want to be reading ahead, next week is Mark chapter 6, verse 30 through 44. Mark chapter 6, 30 through 44, and it's the feeding of the 5,000. All right, see you next week.